In this video, we'll be going over cards that were actually considered bad when they first came out, but have since become really good because of a new wave of support or just changes to the metagame. And at number 10, we have Self-Destruct Button. This card has the effect that if your life points are lower than your opponent's by 7,000 or more, you can activate its effect, which just sets both players' life points to 0, basically causing a tie game. There are currently no cards in the game that allow you to circumvent this loss, so it will always result in a tie if you're able to resolve the effect. So obviously, everyone thought this card was terrible when it first came out, but it's currently banned, and on the ban list for a good reason. You see, this card still isn't very good, because causing a tie doesn't help you win matches, but it is a very good way to be annoying at events. You see, in YuGiOh events, they have a time limit on how long you can have a match with your opponent, and you keep playing until someone wins 2 out of 3 games. But if you reach the time limit, whoever has the most wins is the winner instead. So what Self-Destruct Button decks would do is be played alongside Final Countdown decks, which was just a deck that involved stalling out for 20 turns until you won with the effect of the card, which just allowed you to win the game if you were able to survive for 20 turns after using it. And the deck which facilitates the Final Countdown combo also just happened to work very well with fulfilling the conditions for Self-Destruct Button. So if their strategy of just stalling forever comes into a little bit of friction, they could just use Self-Destruct Button to tie the game and try again. However, what they could also do is just keep going for a tie until they got 1 win, and then intentionally go for ties until the time ran out. This would cause them to win once they went into time, since they technically have 1 win over their opponent, and it didn't count as slow play since they could stall out legally by just causing the tie games. So eventually they just banned the card because it was degenerate, and was causing some people to win games on technicalities. The card absolutely deserves to be banned, but it's not super strong, and it was never considered very good. So it has to be one of the only cards that's banned just to prevent trolling and rules lawyering, and is a pretty good introduction to this list. And at number 9, we have Spacian Aqua Dolphin. This card has the effect where once per turn, you can discard 1 card from your hand in order to look at your opponent's hand and choose a monster. Then if you control a monster with a higher attack than that monster you chose in your opponent's hand, you get to destroy that card and inflict 500 damage to your opponent. If the monster has a higher attack than any monster you control, you do nothing with that card and instead take 500 points of damage yourself, losing the cost of activating this card's effect. And since it was from kind of a very bad archetype, Spacian Aqua Dolphin was considered a joke card for a very long time. And then Spacian Aqua Dolphin had 2 things that worked very well in its favor later on. One of them was that it fit perfectly into a meta deck, and the other was that its effect worked perfectly against the current meta of hand traps, all having very low attack. So, a Goki deck would use Spacian Aqua Dolphin at the start of their combos in order to get rid of a hand trap from their opponent. That way they could go through their plays a lot easier and also play around other hand traps they have since they got information on their opponent's hand. And information on your opponent's hand is super valuable in combo decks, as they're able to get a whole bunch of advantage if they're able to just play uninterrupted. And that deck loved to have warrior type monsters, and since Spacian Aqua Dolphin also happened to be a warrior, it saw a ton of competitive play and immediately shot up to being one of the most played cards in the game for a while. Although eventually they hit a whole bunch of cards that made Gokis really good, so it only occasionally sees play nowadays, as it does still show up in warrior link decks, but it's not as popular as it was during the heyday of Goki hand loops. And at number 8, we have Babycerasaurus. This is a dinosaur monster which has the effect that if it's destroyed by a card effect, you can special summon a level 4 or lower dinosaur type monster from your deck. And this card is a staple addition to basically all dinosaur decks currently, because it's super easy for those decks to activate its effect and gain great advantage from that excellent effect to special summon a monster from the deck. But you'd be surprised to hear that this card saw absolutely 0 play before 2017. Despite the fact that the card came out in 2006. So 11 years after it was introduced, Konami released a new wave of dinosaur support, including cards like Soul Eating Oviraptor, Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, and then a little bit later on, True King Lithoslegim the Disaster. All of these cards allow them to gain effects in some way by destroying their own monsters, and some of them even in your hand. So choosing Babycerasaurus as their targets just allowed them to gain even more advantage. And all 3 of those cards are staple additions in all dinosaur decks. And you'd think a card like Babycerasaurus with the potential to be broken would have seen play in the past. But dinosaur decks just weren't a thing until 2017. If you wanted to play dinosaur deck, you play Dino Rabbit, which only used normal dinosaur type monsters, and the Evolsaur Xyz monsters. So Babycerasaurus always had the potential to be good, but just didn't have a deck or archetype that supported its potentially broken combos. Kind of like the Snake Rain of the dinosaurs. That was until 2017 with the new wave of dinosaur support. Now it's kind of hard to imagine dinosaur decks without Babycerasaurus. And at number 7, we have Appointer of the Red Lotus. This is a trap card which requires you to pay 2,000 life points to look at your opponent's hand. Then you get to select any one card in it and remove from play until the end of your opponent's next turn. So for paying a fourth of your life points, you only got to remove one card for one turn from your opponent's hand. So this card was always considered terrible and didn't see any play when it first came out in 2009. In fact, it didn't really see play until 2015, where it started seeing niche play, but it wasn't really until 2017 that it really took off as a staple card. And now the card sees all kinds of play in a whole bunch of different kinds of meta decks, for the same reason Spacian Aqua Dolphin kinda did. Being able to look at your opponent's hand and get rid of a card just allows you to gain so much advantage against other meta decks, as it allows you to have information on your opponent's hand and get rid of potential problem hand traps that might hinder your plays. Or if used during your opponent's turn, you can get rid of that one starter which starts their entire combo or board setup. It's more useful if used on your turn, and that's why it wasn't used for so long, because it was a trap card that had to be set for a turn before you could even use it. It was meant to be a very worse version of Trap Dust Shoot, which itself was a worse version of some of the earlier played spell cards like Confiscation, that allowed you to discard cards from your opponent's hand for very little cost. So the weak version of the weaker version of a hand discard effect eventually started to see play once the shift in the metagame turned to hand traps, because before then people just kind of used normal trap cards to stop stuff, and sniping stuff from your opponent's hand is just more valuable nowadays than it was back then. Which is why Appointer of the Red Lotus has seen a lot of staple play, despite the fact that it was considered a bad card when it first came out. And at number 6, we have Smoke Grenade of the Thief. This is an equipped spell card that can only activate its effect if it's destroyed by a card effect while it's equipped to a monster, in which case you get to select one card from your opponent's hand and discard it to the graveyard. So it's basically exactly like Confiscation, except it has a much steeper activation cost. You need to use a card effect in order to destroy this card after you equip it to something. This card was actually considered bad all the way until 2020, despite the fact it came out in 2003. Although I guess it did see a topping spot in one deck in 2017, but even then, that's still over 15 years of no play before it saw experimentation in a topping deck. In 2020 though, the card is actually good enough to the point where people are theorizing that it will be banned in the next ban list. So how did a card go from no play at all the way to the potential ban status after 15 years? Well, like I said with Appointer of the Red Lotus and Spacian Aqua Dolphin, the effect to look at your opponent's hand and disrupt is super valuable, and the effect to Smoke Grenade of the Thief is better than both of their effects, as it allows you to pick any card and get rid of it without restrictions. And there are two meta decks that are able to make use of Smoke Grenade pretty easily, and that's the Flame Noble Knights and Dragon Link. Flame Noble Knights have this card called Flame Noble Knight Emperor Charles, where it has the effect during the end phase that allows you to equip a spell card from your graveyard to this card, to then equip a Fire Warrior monster from your deck to it as well. And then its first effect is that if it's equipped with an equip card, you can destroy one card in the field. So if you just get Smoke Grenade into the graveyard, which is super easy with Flame Noble Knights, then you can just equip it during the end phase and then destroy it with its other effect in order to look at your opponent's hand and get rid of a card. And in Dragon Links, they're able to search the card out with Violent Cube, who can be brought out of the deck with Halquiferbacks, since Dragon Links go into that card no problem very easily. And then they can just equip it to a Rocket Tracer, who can destroy it with its effect in order to special summon another card from the deck. So Dragon Links are able to activate the effect pretty easily while going through their combos normally, and the card was kind of designed around being hard to use. So it's just a little bit too good when it can be activated so easily in decks that are already good, with Dragon Link probably being one of the best decks of the current meta. And at number 5, we have Samsara Lotus. This card came out in 2008 and then got banned pretty quickly after Link Monsters came out, and was considered pretty useless for almost its entire life. Samsara Lotus was actually considered the worst version of Treeborn Frog, funny enough, since it had the effect where it can special summon itself from the graveyard during your end phase as long as you don't control any spell or trap cards. But it has to be in attack position, it has no stats, so it's basically a sitting target for your opponent. And if it manages to survive your opponent's turn, you take 1000 damage during your standby phase. Whereas Treeborn Frog has kind of the same conditions as Samsara Lotus, except it special summons itself during your standby phase and doesn't have any negative effects. Although Treeborn Frog got an errata where they gave its effect a once per turn, where they left Samsara Lotus alone because no one used it, which became a problem once a few Link monsters came out. You see, there's this combo with Topologic Bomber Dragon, Trickstar Black Catback, and Nightmare Cerberus, where if you get those 3 cards out and co-linked, you have an effect in place where your co-linked monsters can't be destroyed by card effects. Each time a monster is summoned to a link pointing zone, all monsters in the main monster zones are destroyed. And every time a monster that a Trickstar Black Catback is pointing to goes to the graveyard, you inflict 200 damage to your opponent. So if you just summon Samsara Lotus to where Black Catbat is pointing to, then it will get destroyed and you inflict 200 damage to your opponent. Then during the end phase it will come back, and then you can summon it to the spot that Catbat is pointing to be destroyed again, and inflict another 200 points of damage. And then just repeat infinitely because none of these effects are once per turn. And since Samsara Lotus was kind of the most useless card of that entire combo, they just banned it rather than bother to give an errata like they did to Treeborn Frog, or to ban the other Link monsters that were involved in the combo. Since they were the new hotness at the time, and they generally don't ban new cards when they can just ban an older one instead. So it definitely deserves to be banned because of the potential to abuse its effect. But before Link monsters, it wasn't really used outside of anything but gimmicks, and was squarely considered just a worse Treeborn Frog. And at number 4, we have Phoenixian Cluster Amaryllis. This is a level 8 plant type monster which has restrictions on it that don't allow it to be special summoned except with its own effect, or with one of its support cards. And this card is kind of banned for the same reason as Samsara Lotus, except it's a little bit better. You see, this card has the effect where, if it's destroyed and sent to your graveyard, you get to inflict 800 points of damage to your opponent. And during the end phase, you can special summon this card from the graveyard by banishing one plant type monster from your graveyard. And since its effect is not once per turn, what decks would do in the OCG was just play a whole bunch of plants in order to get at least 8 other plant type monsters into the graveyard. That way they could activate the effect of Phoenixian 10 times during the end phase, which would allow you to burn for 8,000 points of damage, and be a first turn kill. And since the combo was so easy to set up with the massive amounts of good plant support, and the new Link monsters like Topologic Bomber Dragon, the card actually got banned before the TCG even got the pieces to use that combo. So it never got to see any competitive play at all in the TCG, because it was just banned preemptively. So when it first came out in 2009, it didn't see any competitive play, and got banned in the TCG before it got its chance to shine. But it definitely was used in a whole bunch of FTK decks in the OCG. And at number 3, we have Grinder Golem, another card which got banned because of Link monsters. This card has the effect where it can special summon itself to your opponent's side of the field at the cost of giving up your normal summon, and you get 2 tokens with no stats and attack position on your side of the field. Now, generally, giving up your normal summon in order to give your opponent a 3000 attack monster isn't very good, especially since you only got 2 very weak tokens in the process. And really, before Link monsters, there wasn't really a good way to make use of this, outside of a few gimmick decks. But then when Link monsters came out, Grinder Golem kind of became the most played card in the game overnight, because it was super powerful with the ability of Link monsters being able to use tokens as their full materials, as they just kept bouncing Grinder Golem back to their hand to use its effect over and over during their first turn, since it didn't have a once per turn on its effect. So, thanks to cards like Acoustic Magician, Security Dragon, and then Firewall Dragon, you could easily bounce it back to your hand 3 times during your opening turn, which just allowed you to start your combos with a full board of Link monsters. Konami did ban potentially broken cards when they released Link monsters, like Level Eater, but they kind of missed a few cards like Grinder Golem because they were so useless for so long that it was real easy to miss those things. The reason they caught Level Eater was because that card actually saw competitive play in the past, so it was real easy to see how that card would be broken with Link monsters. Although a little bit harder to see previously bad cards like Grinder Golem, Samsara Lotus, and kind of the next spot on this list. And at number 2, we have number 42, Galaxy Tomahawk. This is a generic rank 7 monster which simply has the effect where you can detach 2 of its materials in order to special summon as many tokens as possible to your side of the field. Each one has 2000 attack and is level 6, but they're destroyed during the end of the turn, and your opponent takes no further damage during the turn to use the effect. So since Galaxy Tomahawk itself has 0 attack, there wasn't really a use for the tokens you could summon with its effect, other than destroying your opponent's monsters that maybe had less than 2000 attack, or maybe using one of them for a synchro play, since they were kind of high level tokens. The card came out in 2014 and didn't see any play until Link monsters came out, With Link monsters, the ability to fill your board with tokens became kind of broken. Any 2 level 7 monsters could turn into 5 extra Link materials, which was just kind of extra advantage to generate. But since level 7 is kind of hard to go into, it did kind of fall under the radar for a lot longer than Grinder Golem did, as that card got banned pretty early on in Link format, whereas Galaxy Tomahawk lasted all the way until nearly the Master Rule revisions, and then eventually got banned because it was always good during the Link format. It allowed you to go basically +4 in card advantage, so it got banned before it could be made even more broken with the lesser restrictions in the Master Rule revisions, aka Master Rule 5. And at number 1, we have the Tyrant Neptune. This card takes number 1 spot in a lot of my lists because it's just so strong that it kind of shows up a lot and usually beats everything else out with its effect. You see, this card has the effect where it can't be special summoned and you can only tribute summon this card, and then it gains attack equal to the monsters used for its tribute summon, and it can only use 1 tribute if it wants, and it can permanently copy the effects of one of the monsters used for its tribute summon in the graveyard. So for a long time, this card wasn't used because that was kind of restrictive. And if you could already summon the monster to the field anyway, what was the point in tributing it in order to have its effect copied? But then they released a card called Amaryllis Independent Nightingale, which could be cheated out of the extra deck with instant fusion, and had an effect that comboed so well with the Tyrant Neptune that they kind of had to ban the card, because it became kind of brokenly overpowered. If it copied Nightingale's effect, it would become immune to all card effects, have 6,000 attack, and have the ability to inflict 5,000 points of effect damage to your opponent once per turn. So if you could just keep the thing around for 2 turns, you'd win through its effect damage alone. Or you could win if you just attacked with its massive 6,000 attack body who was immune to all card effects. The Tyrant Neptune never actually saw competitive play in the TCG, funny enough, because it got banned before they ported over Independent Nightingale to the TCG. So kind of like Phoenixian cluster Amaryllis, and never got a chance to shine as broken, and went unplayed for so long and definitely deserves to be banned, and is a really good example of what this list is all about. They probably wouldn't unban the Tyrant Neptune even if they did ban Independent Nightingale, because the ability to copy effects permanently from the graveyard is just ripe for abuse. And it's just safe to keep the card banned. Kind of like self-destruct button. Alright, and that's the list. You think there's any other cards that are better than the ones that are on this list that I should have mentioned? If so, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments, as well as ideas for future videos just like this one. And just a note, I finally enabled channel memberships for the channel, if you want to watch the top 10s early or just have a way to pick topics to be made. And by popular demand, I also created a Go to Sleep playlist, if you're one of the people who like to watch these videos to sleep to, which will only have the highly edited videos on this channel inside of it, including the 150 plus top 10s I've made.